So we're almost there. We're just letting everybody into the room, I
I
think.
didn't realise you study printmaking as well, Frank. So we've got another.
True, yes.
That sounds good.
I didn't do much print. Like I ended up in sculpture again at the RCA, but yeah, working through print like in the department was really good in a way. How we spoke about work, like it was very, very different to my experience in Germany. Can highly recommend it. It's I'm not sure how it is now. I mean, it was in 2010, quite a long time ago, but yeah.
Yeah, I kind of left my job a couple of years ago. I mean, although I'm working back in architecture again now part-time, but to study print. So I did like a kind of year of printmaking at CityLit. So I was working a lot with Sue Baker Kenton, who I think she's a fellow at the RA as well, and Thomas Grosser Brucker, who is a great printmaker as well. And it was it was brilliant to kind of focus on that for a year, and that's what kind of cemented the fact that I wanted to go and do an MA in printmaking.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, print is like a similar approach to sculpture, and you have to think through the plate before you actually get to a result. And in sculpture, I did the same. I had to do the molds, and like there's a certain planning process involved. Yeah, it's, in a way, it's sad I'm not doing much print anymore. So I ended up with drawing again and sculpture.
Oh, that's not such a problem.
No.
We've got people piling into the room, so everyone can hear our chat, and I'm sure they're really enjoying the fact that you are too happily chatting away, finding things in common. So it's really fantastic. For everybody joining us, we'll wait just a couple of minutes while the room fills up, because we're expecting a few more people than we have. And we'll start in about a minute or so. We're happy to chat if you don't mind hearing us. Or you don't mind being heard.
Yeah, it is interesting that you're saying, Frank, that you haven't been doing much printmaking lately, because I've kind of felt the same, you know, being in lockdown and things and not really having access to the studios made quite a big difference to that. So it was interesting that sort of how my work ended up developing over lockdown resulted in these sort of digital drawings that weren't the intention from the start of that project that I was working on. So,
yeah,
you know, it's
kind of from March onwards, I started doing like literally all these Sellotape drawings, which are now like 3 of them on the show, but they're already over 30, I think. In 35 are finished so far, and they all happened in lockdown at my desk because I couldn't go to my studio as well. It's
sounds amazing. I think we're probably going to start quite soon, because I think you'll start to tell everyone all about your drawings, which is great. Which is not a problem.
You easily forget about this format that there's people around.
It's an amazing format because people are joining and listening, and we're seeing in quite an intimate room, which I think is one of the fantastic things about the online events, as there is that sense of the personal. But I think it's time to start. We have a very good sized audience in our room, and I'm really thrilled to welcome everybody this evening, and thank you for joining us on a Friday at 6 o'clock. I hope you'll find this an interesting drawing discussion in association with the Trinity Buoy Wharf Drawing Prize 2020. The January programme was planned alongside the exhibition being at Trinity Buoy Wharf through January, and you can see an image of Trinity Buoy Wharf from the boat that you arrive on to Trinity Buoy Wharf, just so that we can remember that it's a physical place and there is a physical show there, although we're only able to see it at the moment online through the virtual interactive display. But I'm really thrilled that we have a number of drawing discussions running through the programme over this week and next week. And the drawing discussions in this season, alongside the exhibition, are bringing together 2 artists, 2 exhibitors from the exhibition to talk to us individually about their work in the exhibition and their priorities and prerogatives around that work for you to hear and to meet. And that opportunity gives us more than one artist to meet each session. And you'll have heard as we join the room that Frank and Ayesha have a number of things in common. I think we'll have a really lively and interesting discussion. So a very big welcome to Frank Leuwer and Ayeshah Zolghadr. And it's a real privilege to have you here with us. Both of you have terrific drawings in the exhibition, and both of you have been commended by the panel in different ways this year. That's a happenstance that we have you in the discussion 2 days after the awards announcement, because those awards were selected just days before the announcement. So I'd like to welcome you both, to welcome everybody to the room. Please feel free to put questions into the Q&A function as we go through the evening, and we'll gather up questions for Frank and Ayesha as we go, and we're really looking forward to having a fantastic drawing discussion this evening. So first of all, I'm going to welcome Frank to talk about his 3 drawings in the exhibition. And Frank is originally from Cologne in Germany and studied BA Object Art at the University of Applied Sciences for Design in Aachen in Germany, and then came to London to study fine art and printmaking, I believe, at the Royal College of Art in London, and has also undertaken an MSc in medical visualization and human anatomy at Glasgow School of Art and Glasgow University. So a really interesting background. You've shown in lots of places and received a number of awards. And we're really looking forward to hearing a little more about these fantastic drawings that you have in the exhibition. So over to you, Frank. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, I will add a little bit to introduce myself. Before I actually studied art, I did an apprenticeship training as a dental technician, which was an incredible source of skills I learned and during this 3.5 years in terms of treating material as like metal, acrylic, resin, ceramic, and in terms of looking at colors and layering colors, has been like incredibly valuable for me. And then yeah, the rest you said already. I went to Aachen, had a wonderful professor, sculptor and architect, and then came to London to the RCA, which changed my practice quite significantly. And I started working in more in series of work and sequences, and develop a body of work about space, in particular about chosen sites that are interesting for me for one or the other reason. So the 3 drawings in the show, they are mainly about my childhood home. After my dad passed away in 2016, I had to take over quite a lot of work and helping my mom over there in Germany. And I started at the same time, and so I had to spend quite a lot of time in Germany in 16 and 17. And I started working with the architectural drawings of my dad. And at the same time also started developing quite a lot of work in spray paint and ink, and did that for a while. But for some reason, it wasn't me, and I wasn't happy with this work. And so they all ended up in a drawer and hasn't been shown anywhere yet. And the reason for it was I quickly realized that I had no emotional connection to this building where my parents and my mom still were like where my parents were living at the time, and my mom still is, and because I've never lived there. And so for some reason, suddenly I had a lot of images popping up in my mind about my childhood home, which had been sold a few years before that, and started working with them. And the trigger for it was, I remember the priest came over for the funeral speech and asked me, so what type of values or did your dad pass on to you, and what are you living of these values nowadays in your life? And I started talking for 25 minutes non-stop, and realized how incredibly influential my dad was for me. So I started off with this whole series of sellotapes. There are now 30 or 35 which I actually finished, all in relation to my home, or the house that I consider as my home, where I grew up in, and my dad, who created this home for me. And so, for instance, the first drawing on the screen here, which is Untitled Attic, was, oh no, before, you have to imagine a house which was actually quite small in 1975 when I was born, but then over the course of 18 years, it became quite big in the end. When I moved out, it was quite a big house. And so it was a place which was under constant construction and refurbishment. There was extensions going on in the garden, towards the garden, into the loft, and the Untitled Attic is a drawing which is in direct connection with my dad. I remember when I was around 12, 13 years old, the loft extension just had happened, and I was sitting with him upstairs on the sofa. He was reading, and I was studying English at the time, and we didn't even talk much, but these moments were quite rare for me, like spending time alone with my dad, because he was working a lot at the time. And so there is a lot of warm memories for me, which resembled this attic and this loft for me, because it was, yeah, just a completely beautiful space with a direct connection to the outside, to the garden. The other two images are they are linked to the rooms I was living in. There were quite a lot, like 5 rooms in total during the 18 years I stayed with my parents. And if you look at the central image in front of you, there's just one wall missing. There's no ceiling anymore. There's 3 walls. Sorry, there's one wall still there and 3 walls are missing. It's actually what happened at some point as well. There was, like, I was living in one room for a while. There was one wall knocked down and it hadn't been replaced for quite a while. But looking at the image now, it kind of turned into something else. And for me, it turned into a building in itself, or almost, it's difficult to see now, but because the image is a little bit blurry. But if you see the Sellotape drawings in original, they become almost something sculptural for me, because of the relationship between the paper and the shiny Sellotape, which is, yeah, at some of my drawings, they become quite a thick layer which sits basically on top of the paper. And they, yeah, as I said, this image becomes more something solid for me, or something that represents home for me, or something about stability. The same on the third image. There's again a wall in the ceiling missing, but there's a certain warmth that is in direct link. There's a direct link for me to my family home. And I guess that is also what I am these days, like nowadays, and how I developed. And my dad was quite influential in that process. And the reason why I use Sellotape is it's mainly, I'm using Sellotape when I talk about images in my mind from when I work from memory. And it is the act of layering. As I said earlier, I usually produce a series in the beginning when I start working about a place or a site. And the Sellotape gives me, it's quite a time-consuming and slow process, and it gives me a lot of time to reflect on the place I'm looking at, and it gives me time to collect material of the place, which usually later results into a wider body of work. Yeah, it is a very careful process. Like, I'd never really planned any of these images. They just happen on the, like, the only thing I do on the paper is I set out the boundaries and to define the outer line. But what happens within that frame happens entirely. It's an intuitive process, and with every layer, the image kind of develops and becomes stronger and becomes more translucent and allows a lot more to interpret into it. And the color is another aspect here. That was actually the original reason why I chose Sellotape, because of this blurry orange, which, like those images, they in my mind, they have something aged to it, which the Sellotape comes quite close to. There, like, in terms of generally about my practice, this, like, as I said, I work in sequences or series about places, and this is one of the sequence which is the starting point of a bigger body of work, and leads at the moment into a series of sculptures I'm doing, which talks about another room in my family home, which was the greenhouse. Like, there was a greenhouse in the garden which was fully stuffed with orchids, and I remember me and my dad going there every morning, spraying the orchids and creating this moist atmosphere in the room. And so what I'm doing at the moment is a series of orchids in pink resin, which comes out of dentistry again, and which hopefully will communicate later with each other, like the Sellotapes and the installation piece I'm aiming for. And I think this also gives a little bit of a hint what type of person my dad was. He was incredibly energetic and had loads of different interests. I mentioned architecture before, but he actually wasn't an architect, even though he planned the buildings all himself. He was an acupuncturist, and but he had all these different interests, and he built aeroplanes, for instance. That's another thing. He added one extension to the house and told my mom, this has been your living room, and it never turned into a living room. It became straight after his studio, and he built his first aeroplane there. And I'm not talking about a model, I'm talking about a one-seater machine, which the wing was for 8 years, like parts of the wing came into the kitchen, which, to the annoyance of my mom, and was an argument every Christmas. But so just to give you a little bit of an idea what type of person my dad was, and I hope it kind of gives a little bit of an idea where these 3 Sellotapes are coming from. Yeah, I think I will close it here.
That's fantastic, and I'm left with a fantastic image of your heritage, of people that are really inventive. Your father sounds astonishing, but the works are astonishing, and you know that your capacity to play with materials is really inherent in these drawings, and they are drawings that they appear to shift and change. I mean, we think of Sellotape as something that fixes things, and you know, it clicks one surface to another, it fixes things in time, we pin things with it, sort of. But the layering of these is really absorbing, and I'm sorry that the reproductions are really quite hard to see on screen. They're drawings that you do actually really need to see in the real, because it becomes this extraordinary material, which I think is really exciting, and they're clearly excited everybody who's seen them. But they have something between being very physical and yet something that's very light because it's transparent, and it also seems to change slightly. You know, so even since we've seen them, since we first saw them in the real in August, you know, they feel as though they're different. They might not be changing, and we won't talk about the archival nature of it. It was a question from the panel.
That's something I will figure out with Tessa, with the actual company.
It's somebody else's problem, isn't it? That's what it should be.
But I've got quite old ones from 2015. There's nothing happened.
Yeah.
So I've got hope
That's all good, because the fantastic conversation around the archival thing was actually surely they'll stop making sellotape at some point, and then they'll be really extraordinary as a material, but they are extraordinary as drawings. Frank, can I say thank you for that very generous insight to your practice, and I think if we then hear from Ayesha, then we'll be able to, it will be really lovely to hear. And I think, we heard you chatting at the beginning, there are lots of things that are in common, despite, the very distinctiveness and meticulous qualities of each sets of drawing in their making. So thank you. Ayesha, over to you. Okay. Ayesha, I'll introduce you. That was a bit mean, wasn't it? I'm so absorbed with thinking about the drawing. So Ayeshah Zolghadr is originally from Birmingham, born in Birmingham, and studied BA architecture at the University of Sheffield, and is currently studying MA printmaking at Cambridge School of Art. And you've been in a number of group exhibitions, and we were thrilled that Ayesha was awarded the Student Award on Wednesday evening. So many congratulations.
Thank you very
and
much.
We're really looking forward to hearing more about your absolutely fascinating drawing in the exhibition. So thank you.
Thank you for the very kind introduction, Anita. Yes, so it's quite, for me, this piece of work was quite interesting on a personal level because it's the first time I've made a digital work, which I know in the exhibition is sort of, it's printed and it's physical. So navigating that and thinking about how it should be displayed or whether it should be printed or how it existed was kind of quite interesting for me. And partly that was partly that was due to the lockdown situation that we were in. This piece of work I was making while I'm currently studying MA printmaking. And we switched to an online mode from March last year. So the intents of my project changed quite dramatically. And this work as well, kind of throughout lockdown, developed sort of other meanings to it because of the sort of situation that we were in. As Anita said, I'm studying at the Cambridge School of Art, but I live in London. But Cambridge is actually my home. I was born in Birmingham, but Cambridge is pretty much my hometown. Had lived there since I was, 6. So I have a strong connection with Cambridge as a place, and it's one of the main reasons I decided to study there. Was one, because of the excellent course, but also was it would give me an opportunity to be closer to my father. And just as I got on the course for MA printmaking, my dad, I think before my interview even, my dad had 2 strokes and a brain hemorrhage. So it was quite an intense time period to be starting a master's and trying to sort of figure out what type of work I was making as an artist. And prior to starting the MA, everything I'd made, it was kind of interesting because I think Frank said something similar, that he wasn't feeling an emotional connection to his work. And I was in a similar position. I was making work that I enjoyed, and it was interesting to be experimenting all the time, but I think I hadn't really found my emotional connection to my own practice. And although on many levels what's happened to my dad has been very devastating, it has also been a trigger for me to kind of connect with how I work and what my practice is. This piece in particular is really important to me because it sort of represents a change in my dad. Prior to his strokes, he'd never really experienced any difficulties with his kind of, mental health, but this, was something that really shook him, and it was sort of a change to kind of his fundamental being. In some ways he's almost identical to before, but in other ways there are things that are slightly different. My dad's a scientist, he's a software engineer, he was a very methodical person. And since the stroke, while he's almost the same person, he's much more emotional than he was before, and he has to kind of find new ways to sort of deal with things, and particularly to do with sort of stress and anxiety. And the main way that he was sort of doing this was through meditation and through walking around the square outside of his house. and I called this project Circling the Square because, one, that's what he was literally doing, but two, because it sort of was a little bit of a play on the mathematical concept of squaring the circle, which is something that's impossible. But with this, it was something that was possible. You know, it was achievable for him to kind of get some control over this type of anxiety. And I don't know if you could switch to the next slide, Anita, that would be great. We can go in a little bit more detail now, but hopefully you can see there's a sort of vague squarish motif that appears in each of the sort of smaller drawings. And the sort of smaller the square gets, the sort of more adventurous my dad's got, the further he's gone away from his work. So each of the tiny individual drawings, which, you know, realistically they're sort of palm size, represents a different journey for that day or that time of day. And I was recording these from the 7th of February last year until the 21st of May. And during this period, I wasn't able to come to Cambridge anymore. I wasn't able to stay with my father. So he was sharing these with me through Strava. But we weren't really talking about the work. Like he would set off on a walk and set Strava and start looping around the square. And then I would, you know, later in the day check in and be like, oh, where have you gone today? And what happened there? Why is this walk such a sort of strange shape compared to another walk? And where did you go here? And it sort of offered up this kind of nice way for us to have a conversation about something that kind of wasn't entirely medical and about his treatment and about his recovery, but in, I don't know, a bit more of a sort of, I don't know, exchange. And I think he enjoys kind of helping with my work a bit. My previous work that I'd done was also about my father, and it was also, again, had this sort of link to a repetitive, intensified action. And it sort of, that one ended up actually having some musical component to it. And he was like, oh, I never realized I was artistic, and I never realized I was musical. So it's kind of, yeah, been nice that it's something that in a way we've made together, and it wouldn't exist without either of us. And then you've got sort of with this piece particularly a third dimension of it also wouldn't exist without technology, because, you know, realistically I'm not making the line and my dad isn't really making the line, because it's being triangulated through some satellites in space somewhere, and you know, which are sort of recording these sort of minute different, you know, at minute different times, and that's how these lines are being generated. And sort of, yeah, taking them out of the context of a map as well kind of gave them this sort of different quality, and I could sort of see them as drawings. And yeah, I think that's kind of been one of the most interesting things for me, because a lot of my childhood with my dad was spent on us doing maths puzzles together, working on mathematics, looking at data. My dad, I said, is a software engineer, but it's to do with communication, and it's sort of all these things keep sort of popping up and linking up together. And he'd done his PhD thesis on communication in different ways, and it was just sort of, I don't know, it was just sort of a nice way to kind of link back to older times that we had together and record them in some snapshot and record progress as well. And I think for me, one of the sort of key things in my work is that sort of emerging is this idea of this of repetition and intensification. And I think that's quite it's quite unusual for me to kind of talk about my work to other people. So it's been difficult to think about how to explain some of the things, but I think it is partially because, as Anita said, I studied architecture, so I have quite an analytical side to me about how I sort of process my work and how I look at it. And if Anita, you could split to the next slide. While my dad was doing all of these walks, I was logging everything in a notebook. So every day I would log what time he went for the walk, how long he went for the walk, what the duration was, and what happened that day. So, for example, if he'd had a seizure, had that impacted what had happened? If he'd gone further, was that because he was sort of feeling more mentally well? And that was, really nice to kind of, again, be able to just sort of have another connection to him. And I think if you sit to the next slide, please, Anita, that's maybe a bit easier to kind of see these different types of walks. There's one there which is on the first drawing of the third row, which I think looks like a little neuron. And this was one of the walks that my dad had done that was the furthest away from his house. And I found that quite extraordinary. And the very first drawing in there, is around the square, but I think you can see he only did one full loop of the square and then was going back and forth and back and forth. And so those types of things, I would be like, oh, well, what was going on that day? And he said, oh, well, these people started playing badminton, so they were disrupting my route. And he would always do the same route as well, you know, like it was always anti-clockwise. And somebody said one day, oh, what about if you go the other way? And we were like, oh no, that's a bit weird. Don't think we can have that. So these types of walks kind of, I don't know, I suppose in the way that I've laid them out in the drawing, they probably seem quite analytical, and they are representative of a database. But for me, every single one is very emotive. And if you skip to the next slide, please, Anita, I'll sort of wrap up a little bit. But there's a counter drawing to the drawing that's in the exhibition, which is Squaring the Circle 2, where I've layered the drawings of each walk on top of each other. So you see a kind of series of intensification in the drawing. And I think that's another thing that interests me in my work, is intensification and layering. And I think that partially comes from having a printmaking background, and this, I enjoy the idea of layering and kind of seeing what comes out of the work that way. Since I've been at the Cambridge School of Arts, I've really got into risograph printing, so that's been really great for this idea of layering and kind of looking at things in a quick way. So that's where I am with the piece at the moment in these 2 iterations. And I think for me, because I have this sort of interest in data and technology and sort of how to make my work accessible, kind of given our current restrictions, I've been considering expanding the work to become a wider database. And I'm very interested in people's thoughts on whether it's something they would be interested in contributing to. And I'm very interested in I'm really bad about social media and using it for my personal showing my work, but I am really interested in kind of taking advantage of that sort of grid format of Instagram, and translating these drawings to an Instagram format, so that could become a sort of, you know, visual database that's expanding on a daily basis, where other people could contribute their walks to me by friending me on Strava and letting me know about their walk, and then I could sort of translate it, as I've been doing with these, into the black and white line drawing, and just sort of, I guess, create a snapshot about how other people are feeling in this. Because, you know, my dad's anxieties have been very medical, you know, medically based, but given the kind of situation we're in now, I know a lot of people are kind of really needing that time that they're allowed to be out of their house at the moment, and those walks for them are becoming very precious. And I'm very interested in kind of using Strava in like a sort of non-competitive way, and just kind of a way for people to use it in a sort of slightly more mindful way, and to kind of track what they've been and what was important to them. So that's kind of where I'm seeing the practice going. And otherwise, I'm just really looking forward to getting back into the studio and being able to kind of do some physical work as well. But yes, so I'll sign off there as well.
So that's a fantastic description of your work and the processes behind it. And I think the thing that's really interesting, because you know, we are talking about a program delivering the inventiveness of the mark, but actually it's incredibly inventive, and I know it all means something very specific. It's great to see that notebook mapping and analysing everything. So really fantastic to hear, and great to see the work, and I'm sure it will be great when you do get back into the studio to really follow through on all of these things. And I'm really excited to hear what will happen around the Strava project too. We've got a lot of questions coming in, and I'm sure that you two might have conversations to have between each other, because I think, you know, there were lots of things. It's been really interesting to have a whole conversation actually about, which I had no idea about. We paired you about celebrating dads. I mean, and I don't mean that in a light way. It's really interesting to think about that relationship and celebrating that relationship, and a relationship that becomes, I guess, something we reflect on, particularly in the period that we've been in. It matters anyway, but there's somehow those relationships are deeply in focus, I think, in the present time where we are isolated or locked down, or unable to reach out, or, you know, or other things happen, people die, move away, all of those things. So they're complex relationships, but these sets of drawings really touch at the heart of the fantasticness they celebrate, yet deal with really difficult things. There are a number of questions coming in, and shall we go to Frank first? There's a question around whether you ever make videos of your Sellotape drawings, so you could show the materiality of them digitally. It's kind of a question about, you know, the slight frustration of not seeing things in the flesh, because obviously materiality is what these works are all about, and that experience in space, you know, the tactile relationship of them.
I have never thought about doing videos, but I did think about in terms of an animation process, yes, because, and it is mainly linked to me working in sequences. So I can definitely see this happening in the future, to show or to make an animation from slide 1 to slide 50 about a certain site or location using Sellotape. Yes, definitely. Not sure if that makes the representation of the materiality better or not, but that's something I need to try, I guess.
That's great. And there are questions. I mean, there's a lot of positive comment about how strong and visually exquisite they are, and it's great to hear about them. There's also a question about them being sequential. I think you said that you make them in sequences and series. Is that something that's kind of infinite? Is there I mean, you said, I think, that you'd made 30 odd of these drawings, Frank.
Sometimes it's set, like I've got, for instance, I had another body of work when I came to London. I did a whole sequence about my first room in London, or my first room that I considered as home. And I drew every 12 corners of the room, upper and lower corners, from one position, and drew like a sequence of rotating corners of the room, which is very animatic. Like even if you just click through my homepage, then you can see the animation effect. So, and in this case, it was set to the number of 12. But if, for instance, about the project I'm doing at the moment about my childhood home, it could be indefinite. Yeah, definitely. Like, I don't know when it stops. I guess when I run out of images in my mind. Yeah.
That's a fantastic answer. I mean, I think it's the curiosity to continue exploring, which drives, you know, the making and knowing when it ends. And actually, Ayesha, in terms of your expansion as a serial archive onto Instagram, that's you know, there's something about that too, which it's an infinite opportunity, isn't it, or an infinite inspiration. I'm just struggling a little on this screen to get to the next question, but there are many comments about how positive it would be and exciting to see that Instagram project start.
Great. Well, I think, yeah, I think now is the time that I have to kind of take advantage of the fact that people are interested in being outdoors and, you know, would be willing to contribute to such a kind of archive.
Well, I think it's also that there's something very beautiful about subverting that sense of competitiveness. You know, it stops it being about being competitive with you, yourself, or with others. And it does open up a space to reflect on the invention of the line and the action, the documentation of exercise as well. There's another question in for Frank, which is actually much more to ask about why Sellotape, to say a little bit more about that.
It is mainly about layering. Like I can't achieve, like it is pretty much to me like using a pencil, but with Sellotape, it is, I'm putting one line on top, and then with the next line, the image is building up already in a more translucent way that I could ever achieve it with a normal pencil. And there is immediately material on the sheet of paper. If I start drawing, it is yeah, for some reason, I do enjoy the fact that I've got immediately a background very quickly, and then I start building on that background. And it is mainly the materiality of it. Like, I do like the contrast between the paper and the tape.
Yeah. Keep going. It's good. I mean, there's something very lovely about that pencil mark underneath the tape as well, and the kind of pinning of that. Pinning's the wrong word, but it's held back. It's constrained by the tape too.
I think, yeah, if you like in the original image, it is like the edge of, like, what I like as well a lot is the edge of the of the actual tape collects dust, which then from the actual, like which then gets taped in, and it builds all these lines, and it builds the image. So it's on the one hand the sellotape, on the other hand it is the fact that dust goes into the image, which are possibly with a maybe I would freak out if I had dust on my pencil drawing, or even if we all know when you draw with pencil and you go over with your thumb and it smears away, which but here in the Sellotape drawings, I actually enjoy the fact that there is material embedded quite naturally because of the material. Yeah,
yeah. There are a couple of people asking about, does the Sellotape change color over time? So one person's asking if it does, and someone else is saying it will be interesting when it does. So I think there's maybe it's different grades of Sellotape.
It is changing. Like, the color is definitely changing. In the beginning, from a certain type, it is not changing anymore. And I noticed when it is in a frame, and I usually use UV glass, then it stays pretty much similar to all the way, all the time through. And the archival aspect of it, this is a question mark, but I don't mind if the Sellotape drawings are aging to a certain extent, like because a house or a site or like a location is changing as well. Like the house I was living in was aging. There was always something broken at some point, and so I don't mind if, to a certain degree, the Sellotape is changing too.
It sits with the work very well.
Yeah.
So I think that's absolutely fine. Somebody else is asking about how much it sticks, but I think that's still part of the process, isn't it? If it started to peel, that would presumably stick with it too.
It sticks fairly well.
Yeah.
Like the Sellotape I'm using at the moment. Like the Sellotape I'm using at the moment is a vinyl tape, which yeah, like what I do is I'm putting it on and then I cut it on top of the paper and peel partly some Sellotape back off, and which, like, I have to be really careful because it is tearing the paper, and it sits really well, like this tape I'm using.
That's really fantastic too. I mean, they're meticulously made. I mean, they are very self-contained, meticulous images. They're rather beautiful, really beautiful. Somebody's asking about sculpture. I mean, we've already said that you trained in sculpture, and obviously you talked also about making sculpture, I think, from inspired by the drawings. Am I right?
I'm doing at the moment. I am working on the idea of a greenhouse, and I'm sculpting with pink resin out of dentistry, where dentures get made out a whole series of orchids, which I don't know exactly how they're going to be. I don't know.
Sorry, ignore my slide. Doing something completely bonkers. There you go.
So I don't really know how it will look like later, but it's all based on the idea of this greenhouse. And yeah, there is, at the moment, I've got 4 orchids ready. if you have a second, I can jump over and grab one.
Oh, brilliant. This is what we really like. And then we have many more questions for you too, Ayesha. It's a very busy chat.
Oh, I'm so excited to see this orchid.
Yes, we all are. It sounds fantastic.
So here's like one of them.
Oh, wow.
And they like they're all standing. It's again the idea of a like the fragility of home, and like the orchids, they don't need soil, so they're all standing free on the roots. So yeah, this is one out of 4 at the moment, and I'm carrying on working on them and towards an installation piece, which hopefully get at some point installed together with the sellotapes. Yeah.
It sounds fantastic. Really look forward to seeing them. I mean, they're so tactile and tangible. I mean, you really need to experience them, and I think that will be amazing to see. But thank you for that insight. That's amazing. And it's the bonus of always being in people's studios instead of in a gallery, is that you can have these moments and find out lots of insights around the work itself. Ayesha, there are a number of other questions for you too, which are around questions about whether you redrew from the Strava routes, or are they the actual routes?
No, they're the actual routes that I've sort of augmented a bit in Photoshop and adjusted, but trying to keep it as much of the actual Strava route as possible. That was actually really important to me for the work, because I think the sort of absence of my physical hand in the drawing was quite important to me, and the sort of I really wanted to preserve this idea that they were sort of technically drawn by a satellite. And again, although my dad, like I said, was doing the walk, he was sort of initiating a drawing that was sort of then being drawn somewhere else entirely. And then I was sort of taking over, if you like, and it was sort of that was sort of how I was feeling about it, that it should be preserved as much as possible.
That's, yeah, I think it seems absolutely integral to it. There's a question in from from Jodine, which is around the musical rhythmic element that you spoke about, and the performative aspect of the project, and wonders how that might develop further.
Yeah, cheeky Joe. Yeah, putting me on the spot. No, actually, no, it's something that's really interesting to me, because the start of this project and the other project that Joe's referring to was kind of about sorry, specifically, I'm just going to scroll up the chat again and see what he said, because
it's in the Q&A, not in the chat. It may have popped out.
Oh, there he is. Oh yeah, so the performative aspect, it was about sort of recording the kind of moment between something being performed and it sort of existing as a drawing. So it was that sort of in between space that I was looking at in both of these things. So in the other piece, there's kind of the sound operated as that sort of in between element, and in this piece, the sort of Strava app was acting as that in-between element. And I think that is definitely something I want to carry on exploring, is that sort of the between of those sort of two spatial kind of situations that you're looking at.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so there's another question about whether the logbook is seen as part of the drawings. It's an amazingly...
Yes, actually, I started out with the logbook because I thought the drawing might actually be written. When I was sort of very first looking at the pieces. So I haven't really done anything more with it than it being the kind of the log at the minute. But the thing is, with all of these apps and things, there's just so much data and so much information that's gathered. It's sort of, I don't know, I think I could probably spend the rest of my life just working on that one thing and sort of extracting, mining bits of data from it and reinterpreting it and explaining it in different ways. So, and actually having the logbook is quite integral to my practice. I sort of tend to separate out the written elements of my kind of process from the visual elements. So I kind of keep, as I'm doing a project, I sort of keep two types of sketchbooks, one which is purely written and one that's purely visual. And I think, I don't know, maybe that's a sort of architectural organizational thing that I feel like I have, but I like kind of having these two things going in parallel, and the idea of actually making a drawing out of that information that is in the logbook is quite appealing to me.
It's a fascinating logbook. because it's a logbook about logging, isn't it? I mean, it's got a beautiful circular relationship to the drawings themselves. There are various smaller questions, I think, coming in. There's a question which I can probably answer for you, which is whether both of your works were framed as they came into the exhibition for the selection process. The answer to that is yes, I believe. We didn't do anything with you two. So the drawing prize, we really like to see drawing as it's going to be presented. And frames actually protect the work. You've heard Frank talk about using UV glass, which obviously will be important to protecting the images and the work. I'm sorry that we've got a rogue slide which keeps appearing, so we'll ignore that. And I have to say it's a Friday night moment from Drawing Projects UK, and I'm apologetic for it. There's a lot of comments around. I mean, somebody's saying that the logbook reminds them of the work by Ilya Kabakov, and that they really love seeing that we're moving forward into the digital era. So that kind of linkage of that logbook process and the digital logging. So lots of questions about the difference between analog and digital. So there's a sort of question around what we value, I guess, in drawing, but we believe drawing can sit in any way, shape or form. It's where do we find the drawing and how do we define it as drawing? So I don't know, again, if you've got thoughts about that shift between the analog and the digital. It's really to Ayesha, I think.
Well, for me, it feels really natural because I feel like it's sort of fundamental to printmaking that you're kind of always operating in these areas. Particularly like with the risograph printing, or if you're thinking about using sort of any photographic process in print, or for screen printing or photolitho or something like that. It's, for me, I feel like, yeah, as a printmaker, I'm always hovering one foot in one and one foot in the other and trying to find a way to kind of bring them together and kind of communicate with people, I suppose. And I don't think I can purely operate in one or the other. And maybe that's a generational thing as well, because for me, I mean, I'm going to be 34 this year, I think, so I've kind of grown up in that kind of switch over area as well. So I've never just lived purely digitally or purely in an analog kind of way. So I think, I just sort of hover in that area naturally.
Yeah, and I think it's the fluidity of that, I think, is really apparent. And there's no reason not to move between the two and to reflect through drawing on that. Is there anything that you two want to say to each other or to talk about between each other? I'm just very aware of that. You've been so communicative and made it not feel like being in a Zoom room.
I'm quite interested in what way, because I'm quite intrigued, first of all, of Strava. So it's I'm going to have a look at this later. But my question is, I find it quite wonderful that you were able to keep a relationship with your dad during lockdown, during this time when he, like, shortly after he had his stroke. And I was wondering, how did the entire project start with your dad, and in what way did it somehow change your relationship? Because you actually managed to take part in his everyday routine without not being there. I was wondering if you spoke about it, or if it just happened through exchanging the data, or like how?
I think a bit of both, because when I first started the MA, I was sort of spending half of my time in London and half of my time in Cambridge. And at the beginning, it was a lot more time in Cambridge because I was sort of trying to be there to kind of help in my dad's recovery and help out home as much as I could. And the work that I was doing then was surrounding a Connect 4 board that he was using as sort of hand therapy to kind of gain like tactility and touch back. So before this project started, he was quite used to this sort of type of exchange in a way, and it kind of didn't seem odd for me to suggest it. And I think it was, again, one of those moments where I was just sort of in the kitchen and in his house on the ground floor, the glazing is, you know, kind of floor to ceiling, and I was just sort of seeing him doing these walks and sort of seeing how changed he was when he came back in was really important to me, and it just kind of seemed quite natural. And we used to, a long time ago, use like a Nike running app and record runs, so talking about it in that way, just it wasn't totally alien. And my dad, like I said, he's a software engineer, so he's quite interested in technology and these types of things, so it wasn't, yeah, it didn't feel awkward or anything like that. And I did have a moment, I'm like, oh, is this weird because I'm tracking him? But then I was like, no, because he's in control of whether he decides to track the route or not. And because we do have a very close relationship, we would speak every day anyway, but it was kind of just having the Strava app meant I'd always sort of check it on the sly throughout the day to see what he was doing, and it just made those conversations a bit more about that, and a bit like, oh, so I saw you went here on this walk, rather than about his, you know, sort of physical health in that way. So it just sort of made it a bit more of a kind of fun catch up when we couldn't be with each other in person.
Yeah. Okay, that's not, like, yeah, I find that quite interesting, that from the distance that you kept this link to each other.
I mean, I'm really glad I had the project to do it, because it's really hard. It's really hard. It's really hard to maintain meaningful connections at this time. So I think I was ready to just like grab anything I could get that was going to sort of help, and just mean we could stay.
It's a really ingenious way of keeping in touch and keeping that conversation going, because it must have been incredibly complex. You know, being locked down as your father's recovering, and you know, just getting on with daily life. So it's an amazing narrative and an amazing excitement that you two have about your work, about drawing, about the making. It's also an amazing, being the most beautiful, and someone has said it in the chat, there's something very beautiful about the collaboration with and celebration of both of your fathers. And they've said it's deeply moving, and I agree with that. Really inspirational, beautiful, inventive and sincere discussion and dialogue and relationship that's sought, found, expressed and communicated through the act of drawing. And I think it's just a beautiful resonance that you've both achieved through the works, which feel deeply personal, deeply authentic. And that narrative that you've both generously shared this evening has been really astonishing, and has made the most beautiful drawing discussion for a Friday evening, really uplifting and really wonderful to hear the insights to your work. So can I say we are coming up to 7 o'clock, and people will need to move on to the things that they have planned for the evening. But what a wonderful way to end the week, start the weekend with two really astonishing artists, two sets of really astonishing drawings. And all I can say is one enormous thank you on behalf of our audience. Lots of very excited, positive commentary in both the comments and Q&A. And it's been a real pleasure to meet you, and I'm really looking forward to meeting you in the real as this exhibition goes back out on tour. You know, we managed it in Trowbridge, we managed it in Dundee. We will not be defeated by London. And the exhibition does continue on to the Gallery of Arts, University Bournemouth. Later, we will see what we can do about London. But in the meantime, please, everybody, explore more about Frank and Ayeshah. Find them on social media and on their websites, but also explore the exhibition that you can now interact with online and find out more about what they're doing and watch where they go. Really looking forward to seeing the next iteration of both your projects and work that you've generously shared this evening. So can I say an enormous thank you and an enormous congratulations, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much for organising everything as well, Anita. It's been incredible, and I really am really happy to have had this opportunity to speak with Frank, because in Trowbridge, his pieces were one of the ones I connected to most in the exhibition. So it's been really wonderful for me for us to have this discussion.
Now I'm a bit jealous because I still haven't seen the show.
there are those people who, about 50% of the artists found their way to drawing projects, and then a number found their way to Dundee. But of course, nobody thought that we weren't looking at a horizon that was opening up to go and visit. So at some point you will see the show and you'll see the works in the real.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Thank you, then have a nice weekend.
Yeah, have a lovely weekend and take care, and see you all soon.
Great. Thank